going on, everybody? Welcome back to I Came with Fire podcast. Tonight, we are here with special guest, former U.S. Army Kiowa helicopter pilot Amber Smith, also
Great
author
last name.
of It Is, yeah, Zach's got the same last name, but author of two books. Currently, this one is about to drop later this month, Unfit To Fight. I really appreciate you sending me out a copy. Really good book. Read your other one a while back. And but yeah, I just wanted to introduce yourself to everybody and tell us a little bit about who you are. And yeah.
Sure. Thank you guys for having me. It's great to be on the podcast with you. I'm a former OH-58 Delta Kiowa Warrior helicopter pilot. I kind of a long time ago. So during the early stages of Iraq and Afghanistan, and was in the 101st Airborne Division, did deployments to Iraq in 2005 and 6, and then Afghanistan 08 to 09. And, started out as a just pilot straight out of high school, went to Fort Rucker, and then worked my way up to pilot in command, and then eventually air mission commander. And real quick, for people who aren't familiar with a Kiowa, it's a light attack reconnaissance helicopter. It only has 2 seats, one for the pilot, one for the co-pilot. We carry 50 cal machine gun, rocket pods. Sometimes if we want to have Hellfires, we can have the weapons configured for that. And what we do, our mission is what is kind of unique in the aviation community, is we are very low level direct support for the ground forces. So absolutely any friendly force on the ground, infantry, special operations, Marines, NATO forces. We worked a lot with the Afghan National Army and then the Iraq Army as well. But we look for IEDs, we do convoy security, we do artillery as well.
Is it this thing?
Hey, there it is. Yes.
There it is.
Love that aircraft.
Amber, right there, you can see her.
Yeah, this is Amber.
Waving.
Yep.
We did that. I definitely have been there, done that exact situation. But you can see in that photo just how low level we fly.
Yeah.
And it was an incredible aircraft. We were sort of not as advanced, you could say, as maybe like the Apache, which is what everybody was in love with. But we prided ourselves on being able to sort of take off and with anything, like no other requirement other than a grid, a frequency, and a call sign, and be able to launch in 7 minutes and get out to the ground guys who are in a firefight, so we can get out there and help them. So that was sort of my Army days. After that, I got into the world of communications and defense and that sort of national security, and have been doing that for a very long time. In 2017, I served as the Deputy Assistant to the Secretary of Defense at the Pentagon, also in public affairs. And then in the meantime, wrote a book, as you mentioned, Danger Close. It's a memoir about my time in the military. And then my new book, Unfit To Fight, will be out April 30th.
Yeah, no, this is really good. Honestly, a lot of the things that you talk about in the book are things that Zach and I have had conversations about on the podcast and with some of the other guests that we've had as well. So excited to have you on because I've been wanting to talk about this at length with somebody for a while. I got out at 15 years, a lot of reasons for that. Made the decision not to finish the last 5 years of my career and retire for a lot of the reasons that you discuss in your book. The vid and the shot were another big reason why. Anyway, yeah. You were not a helicopter pilot your whole life. You flew your whole family, really, right? And then you got into helicopters later in life when you were trying to join the Army. Thought that was pretty cool to learn about you. But I want to start the conversation off with some facts here that I gathered. Roughly 20% of the fighting force in the United States is obese, which is crazy. And this is a statistic from the American Security Project.org. It was a white paper published in October of 2023. So the DoD spends $1.5 billion annually to fight obesity. Have you seen that number before?
Yes, yes, they're trying to take like drastic measures right now to uh, sort of, you know, curb that problem, but also with recruiting as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in that vein, right? So the United States Air Force this year actually is not going to meet its goal for recruiting, which is what, like the first time in what, almost 30 years, right, Zach?
1991, I think, was the last time they
Mm.
didn't meet.
So more than
a
30
goal.
years.
Yeah.
That's insane. So what they did, I'm just gonna to quote some of this stuff because actually we have some good friends at another podcast. The One's Ready podcast. Not sure if you've heard about them. A couple of Air Force special operators, good friends of ours. But they were just talking about this on their podcast, and I'm just giving them some credit, not trying to steal what they were saying about it. But one of the points they made is that the Air Force essentially panicked. That's what I was going to say that they had said, but that they panicked and lowered the standard for people who come in and the BMI, their BMI, so essentially their size, right, body mass index, and that this is all part of what you're talking about. The whole, I mean, unfit to fight, right, both physically and mentally, and some of the other things that we'll get into in your book, but. I don't think that's a good look as well. I know Zach doesn't, and that this just speaks to a bigger problem because there's a lot of gaslighting that the DoD does, try to say that we're not lowering standards. They're just as lethal as we've ever been. We're the world's most lethal fighting force. Meanwhile, people don't want to come in. And people don't want to stay in, which is an issue that's just as big that doesn't get as much attention. And the fact that we're lowering the standard even more to try to bring people in is pretty bad in my opinion. So I'm just kind of wondering what if you're probably aware of that, just given the your kind of lane you're in, but what you think about that in general. Good, bad, indifferent?
Like lowering the standard will always lead to failure. So when you lower the standard, the mission standard stays the same. The mission
Right.
standard isn't being reduced along with a fighting force that can't keep up because of those weight standards and other standards.
Right.
Physical standards, ability to complete their jobs, and why those standards exist in the first place. So it's setting up the force to once again have a certain population, like you said, 20% is obese, I think you said. So that means that 80% is going to have to pick up some of the weight that 20% is dropping the ball on. And what does that do? That damages morale. It breaks like unit cohesion and trust among the team because they see it. The people who are working there every single day understand that you can have whatever four-star general go testify in Capitol Hill, but guess what? The ones who are working every single day, operationally, they get that they're the ones having to pick up the slack while they go tell people on the Hill about how great things are and paint a rosy picture about things in the military. So lowering the standard is always going to break down many different areas in the military. And this has really been happening for years, though, when it comes to some of the standards. I will say that I feel like it's like fast tracked all of a sudden. Like we're seeing with uh this like recruitment crisis and this like sort of ongoing retention crisis that's happening. The word you used was they're kind of panicking, and I think that's a great way to describe it because they still need to get those numbers. And so what do they do when they can't? It's, well, we're going to reduce those standards to get people in or keep people in, or reach a new demographic that wasn't allowed before. Because the Air Force, I do believe, also just came out with, was it the body fat composition for people? I'm trying to remember the exact numbers. Like for women, it was like a significant increase, and then same with men as well. I'm not going to say the numbers because I'll get them.
Fat that you can like be taped for to join. For men, I believe it was I want to say it was 17%, and then they increased it to 20%. And then for women, I want to say it was like 19 or 20, and they increased it to like 24.
No, I think the women's now is in the 30s, and I
Is it in
think
the
the
30s?
men is like mid 20s. Yeah, it was
Zach can
like
find it for us.
it's crazy. Like, yeah, I don't know the exact number, but it was like
Yeah.
something that it was kind of like, really, like those are the lengths we're going to now. Like, we're not increasing it by one or two. So yeah, it's just it's setting up the force for failure, and mission wise, like being able to accomplish a mission, it's going to create a heavier weight, a heavier burden for those who are meeting the standards, who are there because they want to serve their country and work hard to meet those standards. They're the ones who are going to suffer because of it.
So in the past,
Definitely.
it was 20% for men, 28% for women. It is now 26% for men and 36% for women.
That's insane.
Yeah.
So it went up 8% for women and 6% for men. Which is kind of weird because they increased like your allowed body fat like matrix percentage or whatever. But the Air Force for what was like the last like 6-ish years, you didn't have to tape on your annual PT test. Like that wasn't a thing anymore. But then the year they implement that you can be fatter to join, they re-implemented the tape. So like this is the year that they re-implemented you have to be taped every single year.
Yeah,
So
that
it's
doesn't
like
make sense.
it's like so you're gonna let the fat people in, but then you're gonna punish the fat people currently in. So that makes sense.
It just
And then
shows
the
you how
fat,
well the Air
yeah.
Force thinks. Not exactly the smartest branch, even though we advertise ourselves to be, But yeah, no, but I can exactly what you're talking about, it making it harder on people in the unit. Because let's be honest, like in every unit, there are a small amount of people who do the majority of the work anyway, right?
Yeah.
And then there are people who really don't even belong there. And then there are the people, the larger portion are the people that show up and they just do their job and they go home, which is totally fine,
Yeah.
right? They meet standard, they go home. But I've seen this firsthand, what you're talking about, and it made so I became an NCO really early on in my career. So I spent the majority of my career as an NCO. I got out as an E6, and so I was been supervising people almost the majority of my career. I also came in later in life as well. I was 23 when I enlisted. But one of the things that you said in the book is that even in the past 10 years, the military is unrecognizable from what it was a decade ago. And that is so true. And I read that, I was like, man, like I'm glad somebody else is saying this because it is true. And I can really mostly speak on what I saw in the Air Force. But you will probably remember the whole just debacle at basic training with the TIs and the lines you were crossing with the trainees and all that stuff, and just in typical military fashion, the knee-jerk reaction to change, all this stuff. And for me, right, and that's where I really saw the biggest change almost immediately, because the way they were training people had dropped very, very bad, and you could see it when they were coming to the installation, and they didn't know certain things they should have already. Just the discipline and the military bearing wasn't there, and that's just the beginning, right? And so sort of this slow motion train wreck over the past 15 years that I was in saw this happen. But to your point about it making it harder on people, as I was getting out, a lot of this, I guess the mental health issue, but then the abusing of the mental health system within the military really, really threw a lot of roadblocks in the way of actually like discipline and being an NCO and holding people to a standard and making sure people do their job. Chain of command completely went away for me. What I see, this is a problem that I have discussed with some of my other friends who are still in, and essentially what it is a lot of this younger generation coming in, they don't really understand or see the military as something that isn't just a job. It may as well just be Walmart, right? And the military is fostering that idea, in my opinion, of that it's okay. And I've sat in, Wing Commander All Calls, which is the base commander for the Air Force, and he's saying, to us as NCOs and senior NCOs, hey, it's okay that they think this way, and it's okay if they don't want to commit the way you committed not that long ago. And it seems like
That's how the Air Force
backward
currently
business model.
recruits.
Mm-hmm.
So, like,
Yeah.
being in recruiting, the Air Force currently teaches its recruiters not to. So when I joined, it was about. I joined 2011. My recruiter was still talking about like patriotism and having like a higher purpose and, going to go fight the bad guys, all sorts of stuff. In today, it's nothing about that at all. It's about, hey, come do this for us for 4 to 6 years, and we'll give you your college education. Or hey, come do this for 4 to 6 years, and you'll have a steady paycheck every first of 15. We don't sell patriotism. We don't sell, like brotherhood or sisterhood. We don't sell camaraderie. It's just not a thing that's pushed at all because that doesn't speak to the current demographic that we're trying to put in. If I go to a school and I preach, hey, join to, defend your country, join to, stand side by side with your brothers and sisters, join to be part of something bigger, they'll go, nah, I'll go work for Taco Bell, or I'll go play Xbox, or I'll go do something else because that doesn't interest me. But if I say, hey, come join, and I'll give you a 10K bonus, and I'll pay for your college, they'll go, oh, sweet. But that same person isn't going to I think the person is going to show up and do the bare minimum and probably less than the minimum because they know that once they're in, they can't just be fired. Like it takes a long time to get someone out, all those type of stuff. So that's how we recruit today, though. Is we're not recruiting patriots, we're recruiting numbers, and it feels like, and this is across the board, except the Marines. The Marines, the recruiters that I saw, I will say that they are still very by the standard, and they will fail making goal like their recruitment numbers every single time because it doesn't meet their standard. Like they very rarely actually change things. But the
So
other
definitely be
branches,
the way that it happens,
yeah,
though.
the other branches though are more worried about quantity over quality. The Air Force would much rather just meet the number than to have quality members in their force.
Yeah, I think that that's super interesting what I heard you describe as the contrast of sort of the older um post 9/11 generation of veterans, you could say, versus what we have today, is that, which I am, like, I'm a veteran that served um after 9/11, and that like
Yeah.
wave of patriotism and how the country like actually came together for a little bit, and people were like, not on my watch, you know what I mean? And people were like, I'm going to protect my country and I'm going to do my part. And so many people rose up and wanted to serve, like even people that, maybe wouldn't have and so, and I do write about that in my book, about how the military that I served in doesn't exist anymore. And I think that that's so interesting to hear it from you guys, which are more of a more recent generation of veteran that is saying that, like, no, they're bringing people in who don't have that like foundational purpose, which is love of country and wanting to protect our freedoms and liberties that we get to enjoy every single day as Americans, and protect our way of life for future generations. Like, you've probably seen like all the Instagram videos that it's like, a conglomeration of why did you join the military, to like all these young guys that are serving. And of course they're all edited, but it's just like nobody talks about, I want to serve my country. I want to, like, like it's all very negative, honestly, is like how is how it seems. Like, people are saying, I don't know, why am I here? This is like, it's just like very, very negative, which is sad for me. And it's sad for someone who like loved the military and what it did for me. And it's sad to see what it has become, because I think most people who have served in the military are grateful for their service and the skills that they learned, like the priceless leadership experiences that they have that you can't find anywhere else. And then the people that they serve with, like it's an experience that you will never have you will never find anywhere else in your life. And that goes for the good, the bad, and the ugly, which you will
Absolutely.
experience all of. And so, yes, I am quite concerned, and it's actually happening. So it's like a valid concern that those patriotic Americans, the ones that traditionally are the ones who are pursuing the military as a path after high school or college or whatever, are saying, like, I'm seeing now in the age of social media, I'm seeing what the modern day military is all about. And it's not what I thought it was. And so
right.
I'm going to find a different path, which
Yeah.
is reflected in the recruitment numbers. And you brought up the Marines. It's because the Marines still recruit on getting your ass kicked and having to be a tough guy and going and kicking the enemy's ass and winning and, you know, accomplishing the mission. And I think that toughness and that grit is like what's missing from the military these days. Like, the military is not college. The military isn't working at Walmart. The military is not a 9-to-5 job. And so I think that it's being sold as a comparison, and it's not.
That's exactly what it is to me. So as a comparison, and in the 4 years, so 3 years of my 4 years in recruiting, I actually actively recruited because the last year had a baby, and then also was a 10th first sergeant, so I didn't do much recruiting for my last year. But in those 3 years, I put 76 new airmen in the Air Force. Of those 76, I would argue 70 of them were born after 9/11. Like, they didn't see it; they weren't alive when it happened.
Yeah.
So they don't have that. Like, they learn about it in a textbook, right? To them, it's just, oh, it's history of those guys. It's not my history. It's not something I should know.
Right.
And that was like our last real national, almost like unity experience.
Yep.
And so all of these
It is.
kids who are growing up that were born after 9/11 and never experienced it. Like,
They've had
like
nothing but like turmoil and like separation between like their own Americans. Yeah, that's all they experienced. And there's something that's what I was about to bring up is about 2 years ago there was a giant like Air Force recruiting conference, and the general of Air Force recruiting service and the chief were all there, and you were allowed to like ask questions. And I stood up and I asked. I said, in the 90s, in the early 90s, the Air Force didn't make gold. But that was also at the time when the U.S. military and just the U.S. in general didn't have an enemy. Like, the Cold War just ended. We weren't fighting like terrorism on like a widespread or anything. So like there wasn't like a common person or entity or group to funnel patriotism or service towards. I asked, do you think that's coming soon? Because we just ended the global war on terror. I know we're shifting towards like China or like more peer-to-peer enemies, but it's not happening now. It's just like a future maybe or a future what if. And so I asked, I said, what are we doing to find a common enemy or find a common like push? And of course, the 2-star general just gave me 2-star general answers. And like, well, thank you for your question there, Sergeant Smith. Yada yada yada. Didn't answer the question and just said, keep finding good airmen. So it never got answered. But I feel like they should be thinking of that, or I hope our leadership would be thinking of that. That there's currently not a unity event. There's not a drive. There's not a common enemy. There's not something to rally the troops for. So the only way to rally them is through incentives, which is, oh, pay your college, we'll give you a sick Camaro, we'll do this. It's not.
Well, here's the thing, man.
Patriotism.
You're talking about a unifying event, right? In like 9/11. And you're spot on, Amber, about just the way that these airmen think. Zach and I have said it before. They will tell you flat out that they don't like the United States. I've heard that come out of the mouths of airmen, and I've heard them, I don't care to be here. I shouldn't have done this, etc. And it's more than just your typical E4 bitching and complaining about whatever is going on.
This is like they are of not liking it. Right?
Yeah, sure. But I would say this too, right? And going back to the unifying event thing, they've grown up in a United States where they were really taught that the United States is bad and that socially everything we are as a people is bad, that we are the wrong that is in the world, and
Mm-hmm.
that's essentially what they've been bombarded with their entire lives. And so they're not joining for any sort of sense of patriotism because they didn't grow up with that the way I did. I mean, my dad was active duty. He was retired. I grew up on base my whole life. I was in Japan when 9/11 happened, so I mean, that's been my experience my whole life. But most of these kids, they don't have anything like that. They actually have the exact opposite. And so when they come in, the military has done a really good job as well of killing that culture. And I always say this too, that the Air Force is not good at its own history or its own culture in any way, shape, or
Mm-hmm.
form. You go ask a Marine what the Marine Corps birthday, they'll tell you. They know the Army is the
November
same way.
775.
Sure.
I know it.
Most airmen can't tell you that. Most airmen can't tell you about some of I know who Chesty Puller is, right? But
Mhm.
did most airmen know who Pitzenbarger is, or Seniorman Levittow? Like these are people that are like famous, or Billy Mitchell. These are famous in like Air Force history. They don't know, right? There's not a culture of that, and that is something that other services are better at. But the military has sort of shot, well, not sort of, it actually absolutely has shot itself in the foot with that culture. They have recognized, I think, that these kids haven't grown up with the same thing that you grew up with, Amber, right? And that I grew up with. There's no love of country anymore. So like you said, Zach, they have to sell them on the shiny things to get them to come
Tangibles.
in.
Yeah.
But when they're in, you would think, right? Okay, well, maybe in the same with this whole BMI thing. Well, we'll get them in, and then we'll get them in shape, and then we'll be okay. And I've heard that, right? This problem for quote unquote tomorrow me, right? Tomorrow me will fix this problem when they're in, and they haven't done anything to do that. There is no instilling, dedication. There's no instilling discipline. There is none of that. I mean, I literally, and I've mentioned this conversation a few times on our podcast, that one of the last conversations I had with one of the worst senior NCOs I've met in the military was, my job as an NCO is not to enforce standards. It's to make sure that the airmen want to re-enlist. And I told her, I said, that is not my job. And my job is not to make them want to re-enlist. We could recount that whole conversation, but that is what they want, is placation, to keep it copacetic, so they want to stay in, that they don't have to, there's no expectation of work, there's no expectation of hardship. And go figure, the kids that want to come in and they want to be challenged, because oh my God, imagine that, human beings want challenges, right? They go to maybe the Marine Corps or something like that. They
Mm-hmm.
don't serve, and you will, the people that do come in, but for the most part, they see this. They see the lies about the vid mandate. They see the lies about lethality. They see lowering standards. And one of the calls of the military is being a part of an elite group of people, being a part of something bigger than yourself, something tougher than yourself, coming out better on the other end. And when you take all of these tenets of the military and you face them outwards and you say, hey, we're not doing this anymore, what's the appeal? Right? What's the appeal to this generation of 18 to 22-year-olds to come in for anything other than it is a job? So that is what their behavior is, because that's what they've been sold on. They have not been sold on the camaraderie, the discipline, the dedication, the honor, the integrity. They've not been sold on that at all. So what do you expect, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what you get when that's
Yeah,
what you're fishing for, if that makes sense, right?
it does. Yeah. Well, it's not, the scary part about all of this is that, like, bigger picture is that it's not sustainable. And we absolutely have a crisis of leadership in the military right now, where they have an issue with living in reality and telling the truth. And it is out of fear of their own reputation, their own
Mm-hmm.
job, their own promotion schedule. And so you have situations like you just described, a culture, right? It's become a culture in the military that is, not pro-America, not sort of like, one of the Army core values is selfless service. And that's like not on the forefront anymore. Like you said, it's like, what are you going to give me? What are you
Mhm.
going to give me? Because that's why
Yeah.
I'm here. You're supposed to give me things.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And so you have the military, who is very a big fan of investigating itself. So when all of these things, when the recruitment numbers aren't met, they
So no real
investigate themselves
accountability.
and say, what's the problem here?
It's a
And that goes
self-licking
back to
ice
the
cream
crisis
cone.
of leadership, where they refuse to live in the reality that is all of this woke culture, this
Mhm.
focusing on anything and everything except for the mission and what it takes to get there, readiness, training, all of that. And you are bogging down, you know, just like layer upon layer of everything except focusing on the mission. We're seeing that in Army aviation right now, which is we can like get into, but
For sure.
it's the issue with like leadership not being realistic. And so when you have like people who may bring it up, fearful of retaliation, they learn once, or guess what? They have their mentor, say an O5 brings up like, hey, we've got a culture problem in this unit. Like none, like these younger, like lower level, are like, this is the culture that they think the military is all about these days. And the O6 says to the O5 like, hey, I hear you, but like make sure you don't bring that up when we go to this
Mhm.
meeting, and like
Yep.
tell people what's actually happening. And then
Mhm.
it gets like all the way up to the Pentagon level, where guess what, the political appointee positions, they are a limited period. So like they have a limited time there. And so they just want to kick the can down the road. They're not there to solve a problem.
Mhm.
And
No,
so it's this like vicious cycle of like, oh yeah, it's really bad, but that's the next person's problem.
exactly. Like I was saying, that problem for tomorrow me. And these are the same people that when they get out, they go to the next job, they'll make that excuse like you said, and then they'll get on Facebook 5 years later and make the comment about how like, oh well, when I was in command or when I was serving, it wasn't like that, and we didn't do that, and this wasn't the way it was, and it was tougher when I was in. Even though you're a part of the problem and help create the problem by kicking the can down the road. And the overall problem you're talking about is accountability, which is definitely a theme that you touch on quite a bit in your book. You provide some really good examples, Lloyd Austin and General Milley. And then one of the things too, I was going to ask you if you could, for our listeners, give us a rundown about the situation with Lieutenant Colonel Scheller, because one of the points you made in your book is that he's the only person that has met any sort of like, it's not even NJP. He was been punished for what he did in speaking out against the way the Afghanistan drawdown and pullout happened. But he's the only person that's been held accountable for anything, right? Even though what he was being held accountable for is not, it doesn't have anything to do with the draw out. It's his criticism of the draw. But I was wondering if you could go and into what happened with him and the way you described it in the book.
Yeah, so Colonel Schiller's story is, we all watched the chaos of the
Mm-hmm.
Afghanistan withdrawal, which turned into the evacuation. And I think for veterans, active duty, or people who have gotten out, who watched that, who spent years of their lives, who had their friends killed, terribly wounded, like worked with Afghan partners there, like devoted a significant chunk of their life to that country. So when that withdrawal happened, I think a lot of people felt betrayed. And then to hear senior leaders and the president talk about how it was a success and how they did no wrong, how they killed 10 civilians and said it was a righteous strike, and really tried to hold on to the narrative that uh I mean, it's almost like impressive that they were trying to get away with that narrative. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's unreal that they tried to take that
It
and
is.
run with it. And they it wasn't until, the New York Times report came out that they were like, actually, this was an aid worker and his family. And the secondary explosion was a propane tank that was parked next to the explosion that happened. That they finally had to come clean about it. But ever since then, it has just been denial and talking
Mm-hmm.
points and backtracking. And so people saw that. Veterans saw that and were deeply affected by that. And we're human beings. That's like an emotional thing that it stirred up in most people that I know that served there, for me as well. And that just like added to it. But with Colonel Schiller's specific story is he was a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps, was like on track to, he was like stellar performer, great officer, had a bright career in front of him. And he couldn't believe what he saw. And he was so disappointed in leadership. And he made a video that he posted online and it went viral. And you want to know what he did? He told the truth is what he did, which is why it went viral, because people were like, yes, thank you for someone saying this, because everybody else is not telling the truth. And so of course they absolutely threw the book at him, charged him with UCMJ action, which he was, found guilty of and fined. And so it's just, it actually is. No one to this day has been held accountable for the actions in Afghanistan for the entire war or the withdrawal, which resulted in the evacuation. And so he was punished for speaking out about how the withdrawal was handled. And he had, his colleagues being like, what, like, but it was like, not everybody would do that. And I do think that the military saw him speaking out publicly the way he did. And I think they saw him as an extreme threat, which is why they, did everything they could to absolutely shut him down.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it just goes back to what you were saying before about 9/11 and the unity thing. If we were to go back and show Americans that scene that played out there at HKIA, right, on September 12th, 2001, and said, hey, all of what you saw yesterday and everything we're about to do, everything you're going to see for the next 20 plus years, this is how it's going to end, right? This is how all of this patriotism we're all feeling, all these American flags that everybody has now, this is how it's going to end. I think that people would look at you like you're full of shit. I don't think they believe it, because it was a shock to me, right? That the way that happened. I wasn't there when that happened. Zach and I know a few people who were there. And then the aftermath of dealing with the people that we did evacuate and those camps that were set up at different places around the world on airport spaces and such. But I think we would be disgusted. I know we'd be disgusted to see that that's how it ends. And it goes deeper into the whole accountability thing and the lying and saying that this is not, this is okay. Everything is fine here. It's like that meme of the dog saying at the table where everything is on fire around him. This is fine, right? This is the age of the cell phone. This is the age of social media. Everybody knows you're full of shit. And we're sick and tired of hearing that everything is okay. And this just, further fuels that fire, that, reason why people don't want to join the military anymore. And maybe instead of lowering the standard, like saying, okay, not that there is a large line of fat people wanting to enter the military, right, Zach? Because I don't think you probably didn't see that many people knocking on your door to come in. Instead of lowering the standard.
And the ones that are fat, if they're like committed, they usually come back like skinny and ready to go. Like,
yeah, dude,
I don't have to like work them really hard. I usually be like, hey, you don't meet it, come down to this and we'll talk. They want 60 pounds, they'll get there.
Yeah, I lost 60 pounds to come into the military. That was me. I was that fat kid that walked into a cruise office.
Good for you. That's awesome.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's all beer and stupid shit in college, and getting out of college. So, but yeah, I did.
9/11 piece. Or not 9/11. The Afghanistan withdrawal. What annoys me about that too is a lot of like leadership positions that were like in charge of it. They all got like recognized for like a job, a job well done. They got like medals. They were like, oh, it was amazing. And I know that like the official Air Force, like still to this day, like touts it as the largest like airlift in like modern history or something. And it's like a talking point. It's like a thing that gets brought up as
since
look how
the Berlin
successful.
airlift.
Yeah, look how
Well,
successful the world's greatest Air Force was. And it's like, yeah, you were great at dropping locals off your aircraft wheels
C-17s.
as they were falling to
well,
their death.
it's because it is so political. Like the
Yeah.
Department of
Mhm.
Defense has become so, it used to pride itself on being an apolitical institution. Like some may argue, of course, yeah, okay, never is, but they it used to mean something. I feel like, and it has strayed so far from that to the point where like it's not, they don't try to hide it anymore. And so now what happens is when there's a mistake, when there's a failure, they circle the wagon and they will never admit failure, even when it comes to people's lives. And like, even when it comes to like, it is very rare for a general to be fired
Yeah.
for performance. So you might see like, I don't know, some like sort of like,
They just
you
get
know,
shuffled.
behavior like conduct unbecoming type behavior, and somebody may get fired for that. But like you look back to like World War II, the generals that served then, they were given a couple months on, if you couldn't perform on the battlefield, if you couldn't wield results, it wasn't personal. It was just, guess what? That's not where we need you to be. So you're out and we're going to bring somebody else in.
Yeah.
And they would get fired from their leadership position. So like fast forward to the Vietnam era is when I feel like it started to get like significantly like more political in terms of, you know, oh, when a general does something wrong, the entire public is paying attention now. That's not just, people aren't just attaching a bad performance and job to this individual general. Now they're attaching it to the army or the military as a whole. So guess what? We're just going to sweep it under the rug and we're just going to allow that bad leader to continue leading troops. And that is how like the culture then evolved, was the military became worried about their PR like image.
Yeah.
And it has only gotten worse over the decades. And you like take what I said and now apply it to Afghanistan, and that's exactly what happened. They would never admit. In part of my book, I like have an entire page where I list quotes from generals, like commanders, ISAF commanders in Afghanistan, or generals of in different jobs who testified in front of Congress about how great the war was going, about how phenomenal the Afghan army was, and how they could stand on their 2 feet, and how they didn't even need the US military anymore. And, you know, you even have General Milley right before the Taliban rolls into Kabul being like, they're not taking Kabul. Like, our intel says otherwise. This is a hundred, like whatever their numbers were in terms of how many hundreds of thousands of Afghan army forces, and what do we have? Like tens of thousands of Taliban. You know, like the cockiness and the egos of not knowing what is going on the ground. Like, I am so like, the people who get to the level where they just sit in Washington, D.C., and they have not a clue what is going on. So the general officer corps, the flag officers, like the disconnect with the reality of combat on the ground is just absolutely broken.
What's frustrating with it too is the rate at which these leaders just get cycled through. So I don't know if it's the exact same in the army, but typically a commander is only in command for like 2 years, 1 to 2 years usually, and anything that they did or whatever, they're not going to see the fruits of their mistakes or their successes. It's going to be the next commander. But then once the next commander gets in, they have to show progressive performance. They have to show that they're improving the unit, or that they're, making things better. So then they change things up all over again. And I sent some pictures of what I saw on Facebook today, and it was about security forces in general, which is an Air Force job. Basically, the
Military
security
police,
cops, military police of the Air Force. And they were talking about how, they're going to change up the whole curriculum for our MOS school, our tech school, to allow us to be better equipped for our future adversaries and stuff. And they post this, like, if you look back at the previous stuff, they usually post this every like 2 to 3 years, and it's always like right after some new like commander takes over, and it's all like fluff. And yeah, they'll change something because that colonel's got to get a star, so he's got to show that, oh look, I did enough to take my little eagle, so I can get my star. Thanks. It's just frustrating because it just causes confusion. Because then you have little generations of security forces members. So like, I went through in 2011, 2012. Brandon went in 2-3 years right before me, right, Brandon?
Yeah, 09 is when I listed.
Yeah. So if you would have took him and took me, we knew probably similar but completely different things about security forces. And then you take an airman 2-3 years after I went through, and they're going to know something completely different too. So then you just get a discombobulated mess of people who aren't even learning the same things, and you're expecting them to now be a cohesive team, a cohesive unit, when they're just fully distracted. And it's the commanders who were like in charge of the retreat of Afghanistan, or the leaders then, they're not in those positions anymore. They wouldn't be part of the next retreat or whatever. So it's like you can't really hold anyone accountable anymore because they've been moved. And if they were bad at it, they get shuffled into some like back office at the Pentagon for a couple of years until they're forgotten how crappy they were, and then they're put back into another command position. It's just they just shuffle
Well,
around.
if I can make a
moving
finer
around.
point on both of what you guys are talking about, and Amber, in your book, one of the things that came to mind is when you were writing about General Austin, when he was still General Austin, and I'm just going to quote your book, Professor, so I don't misquote. But September 2015 testimony from Congress, General Austin admitted that the military program that was supposed to instruct and equip moderate Syrian rebels to fight 5,400 fighters the first year, 6 months into the program, and after a cost to CENTCOM of $42 million, only trained 54 fighters. When Austin was questioned in Congress about how many of those 54 had actually remained active, he replied, "It's a small number." But before revealing that the small number was only 4 or 5 people, and that 42 million tax dollars were spent to train 4 or 5 people when it was supposed to be 5,400. And then him getting chewed out by John McCain later in the chapter too. I thought that was, but that is just putting a finer point on what you said about the accountability. And now he is the Secretary of Defense. So his lack of accountability is still showing when he can't even tell the president where he's at when he's being treated or seen for cancer either, right? So
it's such an example of failing up.
Right.
It's too common.
Failing up, exactly. And like you said, you were talking about, Zach, and the accountability piece. You discussed Ranger School in the book as well, and the seemingly pushing through of female Rangers, right? And how when they were questioned about it and asked for documentation later, that it essentially was just destroyed. All the documentation that had gone into it was not. So maybe you could expand on that a little bit. I'm trying to recall what you were talking about exactly, but essentially the females that were going through Ranger School were given extra opportunities, which is again a microcosm of everything you talk about in your book about falling standards and all of that. So
yeah, so when the first female Rangers went through, there was quite a controversy around it because many Ranger instructors were complaining about what they saw, and sort of the double standards and the increased opportunity, I guess you could say, with sort of the programs that they were pushed into prior to, where when men were allowed to do these sort of like pre-programs, if they failed, they were out. They didn't get to progress and then go on to Ranger School. They were done till whenever their next time was, where women were pushed through until they made it. And then got their opportunity to actually attempt to try Ranger School. And then 2 ended up graduating in August of 2015. Now, Congressman Steve Russell from Oklahoma, he is a ranger himself, and because of the allegations around sort of some special treatment, and General Miller, who was in charge down there at the time, and the allegations that these women weren't passing, and then he went and watched them on the course, and then suddenly they all got, a pass or got to proceed. He requested to see all of the documentation and the records, like you said, and received, he was actually ignored for a little bit. And then when he pushed them on the issue, discovered that the records, had been destroyed. Imagine that.
Typical. Yeah, nothing I wouldn't expect anyway. DEI, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion is a main theme in your book. For those who are listening, can you just give why you feel like DEI is essentially poison to the military and really any sort of structure that wants to have a meritocracy in general, right? Not just the military.
Well, DEI destroys the meritocracy of the military, which is what makes the military so amazing. Like that's foundational, like that is what allows the military to be what it is. DEI absolutely destroys that. It equity over equality, these more like, you can't say quotas in the military and recruitment, you guys know that. But so now they just say targets. They just like find these loopholes and these ways to say, like we're gonna, these are, and they're bold about it. That's what I say, is that this isn't something that they're trying to hide. So anyway, back to like DEI is divisive in a force that requires teamwork, unit cohesion, unity, and purpose and mission focus. It destroys that trust. Like you said, when we were previously talking about the obesity standards being lowered, or the weight standards, fat percentage being increased.
Right. Exactly.
That
fat up, standard down.
That creates animosity. And same, I experienced it as well, where women have a different physical standard. Guess what? Once again, we have the same mission standard. Why is it different for me? Because there should be mission standards. Because once again, there's like, yes, men and women are different, but that does not mean that the mission cares. The enemy doesn't care. The mission doesn't care. If you don't have the physical strength and ability required to accomplish the mission, then it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. We want the people who can do it to be in those job positions. Right. And so what you see with like DEI is like, oh, let's have diversity targets, where suddenly, your pilots have to be a certain percentage Asian, a certain percentage Black. They've like come out with memos saying that they think like the Air Force pilots the number of white men is too high.
Yeah.
And so they want to diversify those numbers. And then
my Marine Corps counterpart recruiters, they would like be talking to me, and they would say, we have like 4 dudes who we could put in today, but we can't, because we have to put in 1 girl before we can put those 4 dudes in.
That's fucking horseshit.
Yeah. They're like,
that's
we can't
so
even
terrible.
Can't even meet our goal this month, even though we know we could with these 4 dudes. We'd overproduce.
But that's also like so bad for women, because guess what?
Right.
Like for women who can meet the standard, who want to be there for the right reasons, who want a fair shot, now guess what? They walk in and everyone's saying like, oh, are you the chick that's walking in because are you the diversity hire? Like, are we gonna have to like pick up your slack because they brought you in because they needed a female?
You're very true about.
It's like
you're very true about how the mission standard hasn't changed. Like Brandon's we met on a 2019 deployment, and there's a handful of airmen going on deployment if I knew like shit hit the fan, they're going to be a problem to me executing the mission. And I'm
Yeah.
going to have to take care of them or not trust them at all when shit hit the fan. It's just
Well,
annoying.
the
It's
ironic
real
thing,
frustrating because, you know, like we're both NCOs, and there was one airman in particular who had to have gone through pre-deployment training, then had to go through like security forces training, and then get there. And then one day I just asked if they could load a 240, and they couldn't do it. And I was just
terrific.
like, I was like, thanks, great. And you're the one who's on my heavy gun. You now sit
Well,
in the back seat, and someone
here's
else
the
will
ironic thing
compensate a little
about
bit.
that too is that the team that we were there with was the team before that when this is
Yeah.
and this is public information right now. So Camp Simba, are you familiar with the attack that happened there in Kenya at Camp Simba?
What
So it's
year?
out.
When
This
did
is 2020,
Feels-
early 2020 when this
Yeah.
happened in January
Okay.
2020.
Yeah,
There was a
I think
huge
so.
investigation that the Air Force did, essentially because the Air Force was responsible for the security out there. This is an airfield that actually wasn't on an installation. It was out in the middle of the jungle here in Kenya, right? And security forces members who were out there providing security. And there was some support from like the Kenyan Defense Force, but you were talking like one or two people, okay? And the team after us, after we rotated out, they got attacked, and the Air Force Security Forces members who were out there either retreated or hid behind cover the entire time that happened. And the Green Beret ODA and the AFSOC guys that were out there, they went off Camp Simba and went and essentially repelled the attack from Al Shabaab, right? So, it's which I think is ironic that Zach gives you that info from that story, because even the team after that, right? They didn't do what they were supposed to do. They pulled the security job from the Air Force and gave it to the Army. So I mean, I don't know what it looks like there now, but I know that it's a lot different, and it's not the same as it was before. But I think that has a lot to do too with the some of the things that we're talking about here. Is I just, when I was an airman, there's absolutely no way and I believe this to my core, that the airmen that I was in the military with at the same time would not have turned around and ran, or wouldn't have hid behind a DFP or a tower and would have returned fire, would have done those things. And I think that I think it's an example of just the type of people that the military is bringing in nowadays, that happened. The Air Force does have, it's not as rich of a culture as the Army and the Marine Corps or whatever of service and combat. We do have our combat roles, but security forces, played a big part in Vietnam and some other things. But I think it just is, that is a microcosm of what we're talking about, and that this is exactly the kind of people that are coming in. And these are the people that sit behind a DFP and don't return fire. These are the kinds of people that retreat.
And I think that, to your points, like of the type of people they're bringing in and how the military then feels like they have to accommodate them almost, is like we talked about the D and the E, the diversity and the equity. Like now the inclusion is like, well, we have to make sure we're using everybody's proper pronouns, like to the point where the Navy has said that they will like pursue prosecution if you purposely use the wrong pronoun. That they're going to these like extreme measures to change creeds and mottos and songs, taking out the word man, and like really like getting rid of tradition, and changing the way awards can be written. Like the Air Force tried to say that you couldn't use airmen anymore.
Correct.
And so they're like going to these like extreme measures to make everyone feel included. Like they want, like, even to the point of like artwork, they're like, oh, does our artwork like reflect enough? Is it making everyone feel included by the artwork that's in the hallways in the office that she works in?
It's so funny you say that, because I literally had a conversation about that with some of my squadron leadership one time. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, like the Army just changed their like physical like appearance standards and is allowing men to wear nail polish now.
No way.
Like, it's just like, where does it end? Where does this end with the appeasement? It's like, once again, distraction from the mission. Like there is like a pretty easy test that I feel like if military leaders got back to this, it would like quickly change some things, which is, does this make the military a more lethal fighting force to accomplish our mission and destroy our enemy?
Yeah.
Nobody talks like that. Nobody
Mhm.
says, oh, that should come into the equation when I'm making decisions. It's, am I going to appease the masses with allowing men to wear fingernail polish, and what type of, if my pronouns are like loud and proud in everyone's faces or not?
Mhm.
So it's, but it's weakening the force. It's saying that uniqueness is what matters,
Mhm.
and individualism is important, and not the team, not sacrificing for the team, for you
Mhm.
as an individual, and doing what's best for the whole. And that's, they're teaching, especially at the service academies, that's what's important.
Yes.
The Air Force's new annual reporting system. So it used to be called an EPR, annual performance review. It's now called EPV, enlisted performance board. You can no longer put team earned accomplishments on it. It's all individual. So before, you could put that, like, the things I did at my work led to our unit winning like the Air Force Outstanding Unit Award for like 2023 or something like that. You can't do that anymore. They removed it. Every bullet point has to be something you specifically did, and it can't relate to any team award or anything. So you can
Yeah.
no longer tie your squadron or your base winning something based off of your work.
Well, one of the points you made in your book is that the military shouldn't be a social experiment, and I do completely agree with that. And the military definitely has historically been used as a social experiment. This isn't the first time it has been, right? So, some examples of that would be "Don't Ask, Don't Tell" being repealed, integration of races into the military and not having separate units just for black soldiers and white soldiers and things like that, right? So, and that's kind of sort of how the military has evolved with some of the social strife that the United States has seen, because the military is downstream from the culture that is in our country, but at the same time, the military has had barriers to entry, and it should have, and those barriers to entry are going away, and the exclusivity of the military is turning towards the inclusivity of the DEI that you're talking about so much. And sort of my question to you about it is, and you mentioned it quite a bit with the individuality thing, is when I came in, like, I got told, like, the U.S. Air Force is on your uniform right over your heart. That's your new family, right? That's who you're supposed to represent. That's who you are now. I feel like it's on purpose that these traditional military values of teamwork and camaraderie and esprit de corps are being eroded on purpose. I think that it's an intent. I think it's intentional. It's an action being taken on purpose. Do you feel like that, or do you think that this is just like a symptom of some of the bullshit going on socially in our country?
No, I mean, it is absolutely intentional from the top, who are creating many executive orders that are absolutely being pushed down. And but I will also say the military and military leadership is openly embracing it. So that's what I talk about when I say how political the military has become. Uh, it is like they are welcoming these changes with open
With
arms.
Yeah.
Um, and like, if you have a personal or a religious belief that is against it, then you are ostracized. You wear the scarlet letter of shame for speaking out about your principles and values, because suddenly you're against, some of the madness that has been pushed on to the military these days.
Mhm.
Um, and we saw thousands and thousands of people like suffer, giving up careers and livelihoods because being either like choosing to leave or being forced out because of the COVID vaccine. And the
Yeah.
military not holding up their end of the bargain in terms of religious exemptions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
That religious
I
exemption
shouldn't say
did.
holding up their end of the bargain. I should say breaking the law
Yeah, it
by
is.
by
that
not
that exemption didn't fit their narrative, so it wasn't
exactly.
allowed.
But it was very strategic, the way that Secretary Austin wrote the memo that came down in August of 21, when he required the COVID mandates. He said, like, the memo that he wrote himself was fine. It passed, it checked every legal block whatsoever. But he ordered the lower level commanders beneath him, he ordered them to carry out a task which was illegal. They did not have the product on hand that was required by law in order to enforce a COVID or a vaccine mandate. And so, but he took care of himself. He made sure he was good. But then essentially, the lower level commanders talking about being able to think for themselves, and interpret an order. An officer is required to uphold a lawful order. If they get ordered to do something that is not lawful, it is up to them to stand up to that and say, I'm not following a lawful, it's their duty. It's in their oath. And unfortunately, 99.9% of them looked the other way and went with it.
Facts.
There were a few commanders that I know that said they would not require their unit. They would not require them to take the vaccine, and they were forced out within months of retirement. And then there were also some company level commanders that did the same thing, and they were treated, you probably read the story about it in my book, they were treated so poorly. These, once again, these people who loved their country, the type of officer that we want, that has such extreme potential to be a fantastic leader, and already is with what he was able to do and stand up to those above him. But even in his case, in a story that I write in my book, he came prepared. He had it ready to hey, give me my 15 minutes to talk to you about why this is important to me and what this means, and this is why I am making the decision I am. Nobody wanted to hear it. Just do it. Just, the military takes 1 million shots. This is no different. Actually, it is different.
Very.
And so, yeah, it just goes along with, I don't know, that weak leadership that is in crisis right now in the military.
No, what's scary to me, the point you made, is that all of these commanders were given these instructions essentially to force this on people, and none of them rose, or very few rose their hand up and said, I'm not doing this. And there is an immense amount of trust that I grew up with seeing that the American people have in our military, and I have seen it deplete over and over and over again. And that's a point you make in your book about just how fast that's happened over the past couple of years, which is scary, the trust that people have in the military. And one of those things is that the military is sort of like this untouchable thing to the political BS that, which is the point you were making earlier, and that the military isn't going to, follow unlawful orders. The military isn't going to do things that are unconstitutional, when in fact, that's been proven wrong. And I think that plays into a lot of the lost trust that the American people have in the military, and probably feeds into why people don't want to join the military. And a lot of people are getting out of the military, to include myself, with 5 years left. It's really sad to see that, but at the same time, I think honestly it's more scary than anything, because it just shows you just how deep those roots go of yes men. Like you brought up in the book, your book as well, because I see that very often. And the extremism stand down, that was probably one of the dumbest things I've ever experienced in my career. I know that you weren't serving during that time, but I don't know if did you guys have to participate in the stand down were you a DoD employee still at the time?
No, I was gone. I left 2018.
Okay.
So no.
Got you. Yeah, I mean,
No.
all of this kind of feeds into a point I was going to make, is that the military is pandering to all of the wrong things now, and it speaks to the tyranny of the minority. If you're familiar with that term, which the military is very much experiencing as well. The commander I had during the stand down, all of these things, right? If you go on base for the most part, and you go through any parking lot, you're gonna find bumper stickers. They may say like OIF, OEF veteran, or you might see a couple Gadsden flags, or you might see, a Patriot with, Minuteman sticker or something like that. He literally had patrolmen in my unit going and driving through parking lots looking for these stickers. And I had to tell a troop who had a Gadsden flag hanging up on the wall in his barracks room that he had basically, hey, the commander wants you to take that down. And I was like, listen, to me, that's a First Amendment violation, because that is it's your First Amendment right to be able to hang that up. But that's just right. Well, that's not, I mean, that whole doesn't count because it's government quarters, right? But at the same time, I told him, I was like, look, this is how I feel. I feel like your rights are being violated, and this is what I think you should go do. You should go to the IG and say something, because your rights are being infringed on by saying, this is the as an NCO, I got the list of findings from them running through these rooms and looking for signs of extremism, which is just funny, because these are the people you want in the military. And 10 years ago, these are the people who you'd say, hey, hey, Patriot, you want to serve your country? You want to wear that American flag on your shoulder? You want to lace your boots up? You want to learn to shoot? You want to go do that with a bunch of other, dudes and chicks who really love this country too, right? So again, you're pandering to all the wrong things of the military, and it just is like, hey, it's a suicide. It really is. It's a suicide.
Do you think it's mirroring society?
That's a great way to
where it's like society today doesn't have any real problems, at least for the United States. Like the civilians have no real problems, that they are creating their own problems, so they have something to be upset about or to fight for or whatever. The military, like I said earlier, doesn't have like a common enemy or anything, so the military doesn't have someone to fight for, to fight towards, or to overcome. So they just mirroring society and creating these like wokeness things to have something to
like
go
making
towards.
Mountains out of molehills. And
yeah, like they're like, hey, the war on terror is over. We don't need to fight terrorists, so instead we're gonna fight, extremism in our own ranks.
I would say I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that, honestly. No, and I want to let Amber answer first, because I don't think that's what it is. But I'll let her go first.
Well, I think that, society has absolutely changed, but I also think that I don't know if it's so much like, oh, the military doesn't have an enemy. We have more enemies today than, like we did not too long ago. But I think that what is going on with the military is they are having an identity crisis. They have lost their sense of purpose. And so what are they doing? Instead of being mission focused, instead of saying we're going to be the toughest, most brutal, lethal, like people out there that every single adversary should be terrified of, because we are going to destroy you if you look at us the wrong way.
Someone else will raise your sons and daughters, right?
Exactly. Oh my gosh. Best speech.
It is. Absolutely. Yep.
David Velvia is a fast American hero.
Big facts.
Okay, so anyway, but and so what is the military doing instead? They did like a 180, and they're saying like, oh, like we need to do training on unconscious bias, where even if you think that you are a team player and you understand other people's upbringings, nope,
I had that
unconscious bias.
COA
course. And it's like, you are telling me that I am the problem. And guess what? When an institution that you are there to serve, to make better, and to make all of the sacrifices that come along with the military, and now it's coming after you, guess what? You are going to get out as soon as your contract is up, and you are going to tell everyone in your family and anyone you have influence over to not serve.
Exactly, and it's happening. And I know, I mean, like it's crazy too, right? Because you had guys that deployed in 2003 when this whole thing started, right? When we're in these initial invasions into Iraq and Afghanistan, right? And then their sons were there too, 10 years later, you know, and then now they're telling their children, don't do this. It's not worth it. This is and the reason why I said I disagree with you, Zach, that it's not like an identity crisis, like, we're a first world country, and so we argue about what bathrooms to use because we don't face any sort of actual strife. There's no argument.
Yeah.
The opinions that we were engaging with every day, they weren't arguing about it because they were peeing in the tree line. You know what I mean? It's everybody's bathroom is outside. But I disagree that it's one of these crises of a first world problem, because I think it's more of an evidence just sort of how insidious a lot of this dogma is of DEI, and just how much it's seated itself in positions of leadership to where it is now a culture that we are going to have to fight our way out of. It's not just having a couple conversations. Now we're talking about changing policies. Now you're talking about removing people or voting people out of offices, or to the point you made in the book, Amber, about civilian leadership stepping up and doing something to remove some of these people and enforcing accountability. I just think it's more of an evidence of the insidiousness of all this stuff than it is it's just a first world problem. I mean, It could be a first world problem insofar as like every empire starts to crumble, and you can draw strings with, just some of the ways that like our military is eroding to like the Roman military, the British military, all these things, right? Go ahead.
Why is it so hard, though, for society to find the correlation between a strong military and the survival of a nation? So when
Too
the
comfortable.
military is like, we have risen to the top because we have had the most incredible military, incredible technology, and it's kept us there.
Yeah.
But what else have we also have until now, like until what we're facing today, which is a love of country of those people willing to serve.
Yep.
And we had we've had drafts over the years, but overall people still have wanted to serve. And just like up into this, for the past 30 plus years, we have had a sustainable all volunteer force, and today it is not a sustainable all volunteer force.
No.
I want to get your opinion on this, on a letter that went out a couple months ago from the Army, Amber, where they were asking former service members who refused to get the COVID vaccine to come back. They were saying, "Hey, we made a boo-boo." Pretty much
they're getting retirees now too.
Yeah, they pretty much said, "Hey, we made a boo-boo. We messed up. You can fix your records if you were dishonorably discharged or something. And if you'd like to come back, you can come back."
So this is not what I feel like the media played this out to be.
Yeah.
This is to comply with the NDAA. They had to send out this letter to everyone had been separated that basically says, if you want your records updated, so basically like they couldn't get like whatever type of like punitive actions on their record or whatever they were, CYA. Like if they want to get them updated, but it was up to the service member to make sure that happened, which is what this letter was. So I completely viewed this completely different. I didn't think this was a come back to us letter at all. I thought it was a compliance
do you think the Army was actually
begrudgingly writing this letter?
Because that last paragraph says like individuals who desire to apply to return. Do you think people actually came back in this way, or probably not? Or do you think the Army even entertained that idea? If like someone came back and said, "Hey, I want to rejoin,"
that's what this was. This was CYA.
They just probably made it super loophole heavy.
I know a lot of people who left, were either forced out or just didn't re-enlist or got out to retire or left because of the COVID vaccine. And I have not, I don't think the military grasps what they did to these people.
Yeah.
So they took people who have made sacrifices that most people can't will never be able to relate to in terms of what it does to your family over the years, deployments, like missing your children's everything, like all of the sacrifices that come with serving in the military. But why are those sacrifices always worth it? Those sacrifices are worth it because of what your purpose is and what the mission is and what you are a part of and what you are serving. And so when they kicked everybody out or forced people to leave, whichever the circumstance was, the curtain was pulled back on the military and what they truly cared about and how they treat their purpose. The military preaches all day long, take care of our people, take care of our families.
Right.
Nope. As soon as it came time to do that, they threw them to the wolves. And so it absolutely was the most, it was like a loss, like a death. It was a heartbreak to learn that the institution that they loved, that they had given so much to, kicked them to the curb when it mattered. And so, no, it was like they just, and then you also have the financial aspect of it, of like, this is people's careers and their livelihoods, and this is like their paychecks that they pay the bills with is suddenly just gone, basically on no notice. Like, hey, I have to make the decision, like, am I going to stand on principle and, like protect my own health? I have to get out now, you know? So it was just a rude awakening that I think the most recently, the COVID vaccine mandate and the Afghanistan withdrawal, in addition to like, I mean, the DEI and all the like woke stuff, that there's so much there. It's like, that's like its own separate category, but it's irreversible generationally for people and how they view the military.
It is. You're building up people's expectations for the military to be this now, and it's going to be up to us, right? And then the generations that come after us to change those minds and hopefully rebuild it into something else, because this is not going to be an overnight process, and history would show that the precedent is we will fail at this job of turning the ship around. There's not a lot of examples of crumbling empires or crumbling militaries turning themselves around and becoming the fighting force that they used to be without some sort of total, unifying event like a 9/11 again. And I want to make a point that you were talking about like readiness, Amber. I learned something recently about the old British Navy, and I'm talking about like when it was the height of the navies of the world, right? It was a requirement for ship captains, wherever they went, they would have to plant a specific type of pine tree, where it is now the most common pine tree in the world. And it's because of the British Navy. So that no matter where they landed, if they had been in combat and they needed to land and repair the ship, that those pine trees would be there anywhere in the world for them to repair the ships. And that is just a small example, but it's a massive example of the links that a military, when it prioritizes readiness, will go to make sure that it's always ready, right? And that is obviously that stopped at some point, and I'm just trying to use it as an example to say that is what the type of thinking you have to maintain readiness. And obviously we don't repair ships with pine trees anymore, thankfully. But the United States isn't thinking like that anymore. We're not thinking ahead. We're not thinking about how we're going to fight. I mean, there are people who are, right? And I know some of those people who spend a lot of time thinking about China and thinking about, how we're going to, breach the inside of the second island chain and do what we need to do and all these things, right? But the outward appearance of the military is that we're more focused on things like, hey, you wanna have a sex change? Come into the military. We'll pay for it. And I've served with 2 people who went through that process. And I mean, we can talk about that if you want. But it is, again, it's not about readiness. It's it's, oh, well, here's a number, right? We need 200 people. Well, you want to be trans and you want to come in and get your surgery. We need, 200 people. We're at 199. We'll go ahead and come on in, use a round number, right? And it's not about readiness. It's not about prioritizing those things. And I think it, again, just speaks to just the way the United States is going, and us as a people. And if something, God forbid, it happens tomorrow, if the Chinese decide they're gonna land on the shores of Taiwan and go in there and take it, and I do think there will be some sort of draft, right? It's going to be a shit show at those draft stations, that's for sure. I'll say that. And the I already
It'll be
know
hard to enforce. Yes,
it will be, and there's a lot of people in the military that don't even want to be there to begin with. God help us when 80% of the people that are in don't want to be there. So
yeah, they're not gonna fight and die for a country that they despise.
right, yeah, they've been raised to despise.
Yes. And to bring up the whole trans issue and readiness. So I always just the military loves to preach readiness when they can use it to push an agenda, especially when it comes to the NDAA trying to get the bill passed.
Can you expand on the NDAA real fast? Just give a brief what it is, just for people listening who may not
the
know.
National Defense Authorization Act. It's the bill it's the annual bill that funds the military every year. And there's a million things shoved into it. And I've said this for some time. So power of the purse with Congress, right? Every year they get to decide how much money they're going to give to the Department of Defense. They have significant power, and they finally decided to utilize that with the COVID vaccine mandate.
Yeah.
So, but when I say they have significant power, they don't usually use it. And that is my criticism of them, is that Congress carries some of the blame with the failures at the Department of Defense too, because they are too scared to be labeled as someone who didn't fund the military than they are to stand. And we saw what happened with Senator Tuberfield, where he stood and refused to allow the general promotions to move forward because, once again, the Department of Defense thinks it's above the law every now and then, and they know there'll be zero repercussions or accountability, and they think that they get to pick and choose when the law applies to them. We saw what happened when he stood up to the Department of Defense. It was every single person that dies in Ukraine is his fault, and these generals can't feed their families anymore. And how are we expected to? This is what's causing the retention crisis, is because of his holdup. And it's people carry this PR campaign for the Pentagon when they need it to, when it comes to money. And it's how about you say no more money until this is the changes that you make? And they won't do it because they say, oh, national security, oh, China's going to feel emboldened. China is emboldened with the military that we have today.
Yep.
So use your power, which is money, and force them to make some changes, just like they did with the COVID mandate. So that happened. They saw a lot of veterans in Congress saw what it was doing to the fighting force, and they came up with a deal, and they said, absolutely not. Remove the mandate, or this NDAA 2023 is not getting signed. And they agreed because they wanted some money.
Yeah.
So
money talks.
I do think Congress needs to make this a bigger priority than they have.
Yeah. No, I mean,
okay, sorry. Back to that was an NDA tangent. What I wanted to say about readiness.
Yes.
So, they use readiness. They used readiness for the COVID mandate. They said people not getting the shot, it is going to cause a readiness issue.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to get sick, and we won't be able to fight future wars. Then, about the trans policies, they come in and do these surgeries on the taxpayers' dimes, and they are out of the fight, as in like a downslip, that's what we call it in aviation, or like a medical profile where they aren't allowed to perform certain aspects of their jobs for
years.
months to even years. Yes. And also they're like non-deployable. And so
Yeah.
what does that do to readiness? So once again, because I guess it's less socially popular right now, and the military wants to appease like the smallest demographic that exists, they're saying, oh
1%
no,
of
we
the
actually need all the people in the world for readiness. And it's like, come on, we see through we see through it. Like you're not tricking anybody.
If I hear another officer or senior NCO say diversity is our strength, I'm gonna fucking punch my computer, because I mean, listen, the entire idea of the United States is that we're a melting pot. We are nothing but diversity, and have been since the inception, right? It's supposed to be, right? All of us are created equal. Okay, that gets thrown around so much now that it's like a hot word. It is, and it has nothing to do with lethality. It has nothing to do with anything other than being a vehicle for introducing more of this DEI woke policy than anything. It's not like, okay, well, we want to be more diverse, and we need more people who are really, really good at being cyber adept, right? And they're going to sit here and they're going to hack China, or they're going to do these things, right? That's the type of diversity I want to see. We're going to go get these corn-fed Iowa boys to go and join the army, and then they're going to be rangers, right? There's another type of diversity, because that's not everywhere, right? That the type of diversity that they're talking about has nothing to do with lethality. And there's a video of this Space Force lieutenant colonel. I think you guys know what I'm talking about. He or she, whatever, is trans.
There they are.
Talking about diversity is our strength. These kids eat that shit up, man. And this is the kind of thing that gets attention, and this is the kind of thing that the DoD celebrates, because if they didn't, they wouldn't let. And I know, just because how controlled officers can be, and the sort of public attention they can give. Right? And you were public affairs, Amber, you know this. Everything, if you're going to be on camera, you got to go through some sort of PA brief, or if you're going to write something that's going to get released to the public, you're going to have some sort of PA brief. He or she, I genuinely don't know if it was a man transitioning to a woman or a woman transitioning to a man. I can't remember. But is allowed to say that because that's what the DoD wants them to say now to everybody. But I fucking hate hearing that phrase. Our diversity is our strength.
I can't stand it either. I named one of my chapters the opposite of that, because I was like, come on, like it's ridiculous. Yeah, it's like a feel good statement.
It is
not based in reality, which once again is like, of all of this drives me insane, is that like, if we could all get back to the standard of reality, that's a great place to start.
Right.
I know I brought up the Marines a couple times, but the Marines deal with the transgender thing, I think, the best. So they still allow it. You can transition, but they have like standard workarounds to pretty much remove them. And what it is if you are non-deployable for 1 year, you are then removed from the Marine Corps. But every transition process takes longer than a year. So how the Marine Corps allows it but then gets rid of them is they will say, yeah, sure, we'll start the process and start it, and then the clock starts for your 1 year, and you get to your 1 year, you're still not deployable, you're not fully transitioned, you can't just transition back as quickly as you thought you could. The Marine Corps then says thank you for your service, and they kick you out. And then,
how about this? Here's a crazy idea. Maybe we don't force taxpayers to pay for somebody's elective surgery.
Yeah.
And we just don't do that at all. How about
That's what it should be, but because it's currently pushed by the DoD, the branches have to get, I guess, crafty in their way of saying, oh, we're for it, but none of them are going to be in our branch because they're never going to finish it.
Well, I'll say this, right? And I know this, again, like I can speak on the Air Force more than anything. There is a culture of this whole like inclusive thing, this whole equity thing, and it gets put into emails, it gets put into base-wide events, it gets put into the way that we do awards now.
I read an email today where the signature said like their pronouns in it. And it was from like some
That's
senior
been
master's
going on for a while. There's like actual guidance about how you're supposed to put that in your signature block. But what I'm trying to say is that there are so many people, especially airmen, right? So your E1s through E4s, that essentially because of who they are and what they look like, they are pushed towards doing this stuff that has nothing to do with their actual job. It's a bake sale or it's some sort of event that's going on base. And that is more important than the people who are actually doing their job. And that's sort of taken over as the thing we want to see from you is how well can you plan a bake sale, or how well can you get somebody to come and give a talk about something that isn't really happening, but we're going to pretend it's a problem to give you some sort of feel good. And by that, I mean that we create a lot of these issues. And to go back to the stand down thing, right? There is not a domestic terrorism problem in the military. And most of us, when we heard that, we're like, well, that's fucking retarded. That does not happen at all. I've never met anybody. Like I've met idiots in the military. There's a lot of us, right?
Yeah.
I'm one of them. Okay. It used to be. All right. There are some stupid kids. There are people that are racist in the military, but the military is so good at finding out who the fuck those people are and alienating them. There's a meme that goes around every once in a while. I see it. It's like a group of military members who are friends. There's like this fucking dude who looks like he's a cholo dressed up on Easter. You got a fucking white guy that looks like Zach. You've got like a black guy, and then like whoever, a chick, and that's your friend
I
group,
did,
right?
yeah,
Exactly. And it's like, that is the military I know, and that's the reality. You telling me that there's a white extremism problem in the military is fucking bogus, and I'm sick and
but it
tired
used
of
to
it.
be so great, right? Like it was just like natural, like
Yes.
everybody blended together, and it
Right.
wasn't like until everybody started like, let's point that out, let's point that out, and like talk about our differences, and then we'll claim a certain group of people as extremisms or as extremists and say that they're part of the problem. Like, how do they not understand how divisive and like corrosive that is to the military?
They want it to
It's
be.
so out of touch.
Yeah.
And it's like a self, like you said, it's suicidal. It's creating a problem that doesn't, like, where there isn't a need like to be addressed there. It's just crazy.
Right. And that's the thing, is like these processes to get rid of people who are racist and maybe do something that's racist, right? Or sexist or whatever. There are processes already in place to get you out if that's what you're doing. If you're a commander and you're, only giving awards to chicks you find attractive, they're going to figure it out pretty fast, and you're going to be relieved of command, right? So those processes are already in place. And and I say that we laugh, but that happens. You know what I mean?
I'm guessing that happens since you used that as an example.
I've seen that happen. That maybe they're making female airmen feel uncomfortable, right? But no, but those processes already exist. Is the point I'm trying to make.
There was a 1-star general who wanted a 2nd star, so they remade that whole process.
Well, that's sure, but what I'm getting at is you're creating something out of nothing, and you're taking these very small things that happen not often, and you're making them out to be these mountains out of molehills that don't exist. And you're not going to convince me that you're so stupid that you don't recognize that it is divisive, which is why I think it's on purpose. And I think that it's just something that they want to see happen, because they want the military to not be this exclusive thing anymore, because all of these things that make the military good, our lethality, our strength, our exclusivity, those are things that the United States doesn't uphold anymore. These are the things that the generation doesn't believe in anymore. And these are what you're trying to do. You're getting rid of them by other methods. Like you said, like the Marine Corps says, oh, 1 year and then you got to get out. Well, they're just, this is the gymnastics of getting to that point by dancing around it until it's dead, basically.
Yes.
Walls of Jericho. We're just going to walk around them and then they're going to fall, basically. That's what I think. But yeah. But
It was
anyway.
great. It was great.
What was great?
Everything you just said. It was really great. I agree with all of it.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
No, well, the thing I don't think a lot of the younger kids that come in, and I say kids because at 18, 20, I mean, I'm almost 40, right? I would definitely say that 18-year-old is still a kid, even though you're technically adult. Your brain is still there, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I don't think they understand is that the America they grew up in was the America they grew up in, and the America I grew up in was the America I grew up in because of the things that we cherish and the things that we upheld are a higher standard. And when you're the unipolar leader, the hegemonic leader of the world, you get to live a certain type of way. And all of these things we're talking about are just a smaller portion of the larger thing that's going on in the identity crisis that the United States is having, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the life you've enjoyed in this country, this first world country that we live in, where you're respected around the world. Everybody looks at America as this great thing. Everybody in Russia during the Cold War wanted to own a pair of Levi's, right? Because they were American. And people used to look at the United States as this bastion, the shining city on the hill, right? All of these things. You grew up the way you grew up with an iPhone in your hand and a car and food and a warm house, and because of the strength of the United States, and that strength of the United States is 100% supported by the military. And I don't think that they understand that when that goes away, that your entire life is going to change, and it really is on the verge of going away if you don't wake up and realize that. And that these freedoms we enjoy require, it's actually Hold on, I'm just going to read it because I don't want to misquote it, but you put it in here. It's a Thomas Paine quote, Amber, if I can find it real fast here. Those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must undertake to support it. Action, right? The life you've enjoyed up to this point is because of the actions of other people. And your inaction, your nihilism, the things that you think don't matter are the things that got us here, and the things that have made America as great and as strong and as powerful as what she is. And that if you don't continue to uphold those things, if you don't believe in her, if you don't believe in us as Americans, and you think that somebody's just going to hand you everything on a silver platter, it's going to go away. And there are countless historical examples of people who have sat back and been passersby to the walls crumbling around them because they think they can't do anything. And these generals are really just politicians in uniform now, and there again is a precedent of that. You can look at ancient Rome, you can look at the British Empire when it was at its height. These are all things, like you said, Amber, that people don't recognize and make the mental leap to understand, like, holy shit, empires have fallen because of these things that are going on. And they don't care. And it's around them. It's like when you took all these Germans that lived outside of concentration camps in World War II and you walked them through the concentration and the death camps, and they still deny that it happened. You can show somebody what the fuck is going on in front of them, and they'll sit there and be like, nope, it's not happening. And that's kind of how I feel what's happening in our country. Anyway, soapboxing.
That's so true. I feel like that was like exactly what happened in Afghanistan, except I tend to think that they knew. I think that they knew exactly what was going on, and yet they chose to deceive. That's how I feel about Afghanistan.
Self-preservation.
There's something that I want to bring up is the military for decades has sort of taken for granted the recruiting demographic that is veterans. So when they and even more so into the post 9/11 era, it's become like a family business. If your family is served, or if someone in your immediate family served, you're, significantly more likely to
That's
serve
neat.
in the military. Yeah, that's like a lot of people. But that demographic is gone. They have absolutely lost that demographic.
Oh yeah.
And but once again, it's like they can't figure out why. Like they're like, we don't get why veterans who used to be the number one promoter, just like organically, like promoting military service, like going and speaking to high schools, wearing their uniform, being members in their community and promoting service, that is gone. I can't tell you how many people I have talked to that said, I will never recommend service to my children or anyone that I have any sort of influence over. And
they're distancing themselves from it.
Like, that should terrify everyone. That should terrify everyone, because right now what we're seeing with the military is they're lowering some standards. They're lowering some standards, like here and there, wherever they can. They've already, the Army is not just lowering standards, they're lowering their numbers. They're like, we can't meet these numbers. We're just going to reduce like what our force needs to be. And so now that like veterans aren't on board anymore with the military, like sooner or later it's gonna run out.
You lost your biggest cheerleader.
And people don't seem to get that it's not eternal. It's not this guarantee. The all volunteer force is not a guarantee. In fact, it is very weird that and rare that we have been able to have an all volunteer force. And we're seeing right now, you still have generals going to Capitol Hill and testifying that like, oh, I don't think we're to the draft conversation yet. It's like, that's your problem. Why are you not thinking about that? Because that's exactly where we're headed.
I'm curious to know I say this pretty often on the podcast, that I don't really advocate for mandatory military service, because as I said before, there's already enough people in the military that realize once they get here that they don't want to be here and they're a problem anyway, that I don't want people who are forced to join, because then the majority of them aren't going to want to be here. I advocate for some either or, right? So I feel like a civil service or a mandatory military service. By civil service, I say that like you're serving somewhere in your community, whatever that looks like. You know what I mean? And you're giving back to your community, because I think that people need to understand that a lot of these problems start a lot closer to home than you realize. What do you think that something like that, mandatory military civil service, something like that, is a good place to start to try and fix some of these problems? Or do you think that is maybe the wrong idea?
I think we're too far gone at this point. I think if we would have started, maybe in the 90s, I don't know. I think that now it would not go over well. But I do think that the like Israel model of like a mandatory service. I think that it's important, because I think that I think it creates buy-in for citizens. Suddenly they're having to sacrifice something, and suddenly they're having to see the bigger picture. And that's something that's missing in society today. People think that the way it is today is the way it's always been, and the way it'll always be tomorrow. So I don't know. Like I think that it would definitely change some things in our country and society. People would view it differently. Parents would suddenly have involvement because their kids are serving in the military. I think people would care about foreign policy a whole lot more and the wars we get involved in. So it definitely has some positive things to it that I think would be beneficial to our nation. I just think enacting it, especially like modern times, would be like nearly impossible. But I think it would be beneficial.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's why I always say, again, I don't think like mandatory military service should be a requirement, because I feel like it should be an option, one or the other, civil or military. But the buy-in that you were talking about, I think is important, because not a lot of kids and younger people, anyway, I'll just say this, people in general, right, especially Americans, don't really understand how the sausage is made, and they don't care. They just eat it.
Yeah.
And that
There's many
it's
ways to serve.
right.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They take it for
Not
granted.
just the
So
military.
yeah, no, absolutely. And they take it for granted, and I think that is definitely a problem. But I do tend to agree with you that we're too far gone as a society. So that was kind of like leading into my next question: is do you think this sort of like mind virus of wokeism is too deep seated, or do you think that we're still able to change hearts and minds and come out of this? Feels
You
pretty
mean
bleak to me.
for ourselves? You
Hmm.
mean like for our own military?
Yeah.
So, there's like a couple things. It's not gonna. So there's policies that can change
Hmm.
with a presidential administration and executive orders that can be ripped up, with a change in administration.
Hmm.
But there's the culture, which will not change in a presidential administration. And so that is generational. And when you think about what can happen in a generation and the wars that come with it, it's kind of frightening. But you do look at West Point and the service academies and some of the things that they're being taught, that are not about battlefield strategy and leadership and winning, and once again
Right.
focusing on other areas. I think it's going to be really difficult, and I think it's going to take some time, like, and it's going to require a lot of coordination in
Right.
terms of leadership, both like presidential service secretaries, SecDef, COCOM commanders. Like they are somehow going to have to be in unison to be able to change this.
Mhm.
Not only in policy, but in like flipping it back to a meritocracy. That's like step one,
Uh-huh.
because nothing's going to change. Nothing's going to change without that. And what's so crazy about sort of the rise of DEI
Uh-huh.
is that how can you argue with merit? How can you argue with saying this person scored the best, this
Uh-huh.
person did, the best person for the job, best interview, best board, whatever the metrics are for the standard.
Uh-huh.
Like, it makes no sense logically about why you would not want that. You
Uh-huh.
want the best people
To use
to
immutable
accomplish the
characteristics
mission.
as your metric, it makes no sense,
And
And
then,
this.
yeah, to change that, to like lower the standard,
Uh-huh.
to bring more people on board. It's like, no, but the best thing about a meritocracy, nobody cares if you're a man or a woman. Nobody
Yeah.
cares if you're black or white or Hispanic or Asian or
Uh-huh.
whatever. Nobody cares.
Yep.
You're the best. Congratulations.
Right.
If you're the worst, like,
Right.
not going to happen. But
Mhm.
now we get to consider the worst, or just the mediocre, and bring them up to the top in the name of DEI. And it's going to destroy the military. It already, has taken a considerable
It's doing a
toll,
good
but it
job.
is only going to get worse.
Yeah. The Air Force Academy a couple weeks ago shared a photo of a cadet, and I won't say her name, but it's a public post, but it says that her major is behavioral science with a minor in diversity and inclusion. And this person is going to be a lieutenant one day. They're going to be a first lieutenant and a captain and a major. They're going to go to squadron officer school. That's her major at the Air Force Academy, is behavioral science, diversity and inclusion. So they're breeding people to come into the military to enforce this stuff, which is why it's so important, like you said, to understand that this is not going to go away without serious change, because they're putting people through these degrees and into the military. I mean, I made the joke that she's going to ruin somebody's career at some point. This is the exact
Guaranteed.
kind of person that they want to see in the military now, because they're teaching them about it. And you're going to get a degree in diversity and inclusion. They're just missing the E. But I had the opportunity when I was in college in St. Louis to go to the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra. And one of the things I got to see when I was there was their process for filling a seat in the orchestra for somebody, they needed somebody I don't remember what instrument they were playing. It was some sort of woodwind. But we got to watch them do their interviews for people, okay? And they got up on stage behind a screen. They made them take their shoes off, so you couldn't tell because, you know, if a woman showed up, maybe she was wearing heels, she walked across the stage, you could hear the heels, you know it was a female, right? So if you had any sort of bias about females playing the oboe, right, then maybe, you know, they eradicated that by making her take her shoes off. But they made all of them who auditioned sit behind the screen, and everybody who was listening to fill this seat, all they did was determine who was going to fill that seat based on how they played behind the screen. And they had no idea if it was an Asian man or a black woman or a white woman. And that is the definition of meritocracy, because it was 110% based on ability. And they wanted to not let those other immutable characteristics about this person influence anybody's decision about who was going to be that person, right? And this isn't even something that's not even the military. This is an orchestra, right? So it's not like this concept of meritocracy is exclusive to the military. But again, this was 2007, right? And it's not that long ago that you see that. And I would almost be willing to bet that that policy doesn't happen anymore at the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, where they are only determining who gets to sit there based on their ability to play their instrument. So again, like this is a problem. This is an American problem. I think it's a Western
But
problem.
2007 was like forever ago in like the
In social media
in
years?
the context of DEI. Yeah, it was like an eternity ago.
It is.
2 generations ago.
It was
But
like back the good old days when we all lived in reality, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So, but anyway, I think your book is great. This is something that Zach and I talk about pretty often. You could probably write a book 5 times as big as this one with all the stupid shit that happens, but no one would read it. And you know what? Most people's attention spans nowadays aren't that big anyway.
It's on
So
a 5-second TikTok. They're moving on.
you're right. So
yeah, well, it's like I keep, you have to turn a manuscript in by a certain time, and then I like hear about all these other like things that are going on. And I'm like, oh, I wish I could have put that in my book and that in my book, and it keeps going, and it's honestly like
Guess we need a second
crazy
book.
how much it's gotten worse just since I finished my manuscript. So, like I said, it's the train is rolling, and people need to start waking up to the realities of the dangers in the military right now and how it is threatening our national security and the future of our nation. And I hope people can read my book, take some of these threats seriously in terms of how they're damaging the military.
yeah. Well, if I could leave a message, with what you just said and expand on it, piggyback, to use a military term, right? If you're a part of that younger group of people, who is 18 to 22 or whatever, we're not boomers sitting up here complaining about the good old days, right? This isn't just shit to cast off and not care about and be dismissed. And this is a real conversation about real things, about things that actually matter, and foundational things that hold up society. The beginning of your book is the quote Zach and I use all the time: hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times. That is very evident today, that weak men are creating hard times. And if you're part of that younger crowd, please consider doing something to better yourself, training, finding something that you believe in, philosophy like Stoicism or religion even, right? And understanding that the hard things are normally the path toward making yourself better, and that running away from hard things isn't going to get you anywhere. I promise. So thank you, Amber, for coming on. Looking forward to seeing how well your book does. I think it will do really well when it's dropped. It's the 30th of April, right? I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
So that's coming up
30th
pretty
of
fast,
April.
right? And
It's almost here.
Yes. Are you gonna do an audiobook for people like Zach who can't read, or?
I don't know. I was actually just talking to some people that do that kind of stuff. So stay tuned for news on that.
Okay, cool.
I'll
Well,
read it.
anyway,
for you, even though I can't read. I'll read the audio first. I'll just say random gibberish.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for coming on. Is there anywhere that people, I know that you're on social media, but is there anywhere else that people can find you and check you out?
Instagram and Twitter at
Mhm.
Amber Smith USA, and my website is officialambersmith.com.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you very much, Amber. I appreciate the insights tonight and in your book. And Zach, unless you've got anything before we sign off, we'll go ahead and sign off. You got anything, Mr. Clean?
Nope, I do not.
All right.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thanks, you guys, for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. Have a good night.